The reason that it wouldn't be a good idea to do that is that you shouldn't be so focused on just winning tests. This is like a much larger topic, obviously.
Also, your A/B testing tool might be broken if you have 150 winning tests in a row.
Yeah.
Just check your setup, man.
Yeah, maybe run an AA test
Yeah.
and see how that goes.
Book Thinking Fast and Slow is one of those books that I think every CRO person and optimizer will recommend you at some point. It's almost like this mandatory reading if you want to understand human psychology and how humans act even on websites. But it just applies to different kind of stuff. Anyway, if you haven't heard about this book, it was written by a psychologist who ended up winning the Nobel Prize for it, so it is kind of a big deal. And basically what he came up with was that humans have these two systems in their brain. One is super fast, that makes you do snap decisions. The other one is super slow and needs more time to figure stuff out.
So the usual way that it's framed is that system one, the sort of quick snap judgment one, is irrational, and then you have like the slower thinking, rational, cognitive part of your brain. And so it's kind of like it's almost like when people are discussing it that like system one is bad and it's just error prone, and that's because it is more susceptible to cognitive biases, which is what we're going to talk about more here. But I also kind of want to defend system one a little bit because it's not all bad and it actually has its own type of intelligence, and it's kind of based on, and also we should say that neither of us has any formal training in psychology or anything.
No, this is just pure self-diagnosed.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever we're doing.
Armchair psychology.
Yeah.
But the way that I understand it as a total amateur is that system one is kind of like the associations that you build up over your life. And it's more subconscious. So it's actually powerful in a way because it can do calculations really fast, and it doesn't really take into account time. So it's kind of like if you smell something that can just instantly transport you back to a memory in your childhood that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to recall, like using the more rational part of your mind. So it's like there's all these kind of like associations, like this big web of relationships between, ideas, senses, memories, and stuff like that. And when you get some stimulus, then right away your subconscious has some suggestions for what that could relate to. And so it also ties into, if you've had like experiences in your childhood that make you think about something a certain way, or maybe there's something that you're afraid of that you don't really realize it, that quick association part of your mind will kind of surface that, and you won't really know why you're feeling the certain way about it, if it's something that you're scared of.
So what are the smells that take you back to your childhood?
Can't think of any in particular. I just know that happens pretty often. It's like there'll just be like a certain smell, and I think smell is one that's most strongly tied to this, as opposed to the other senses and stuff. But
Yeah, I think some like stores and places use that kind of psychology like pretty often as well.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. So it's also like, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that it's not necessarily dumb. It's just not as rational as like the kind of focus part of our mind, which is sort of limited. Like if you think of like you're in a dark building and you just have a tiny little flashlight that you can point at one thing at a time, that's kind of like your rational mind, right? But the subconscious part of your mind actually has kind of like this built-in thing. So say you've been walking around in that building your whole life, and you just already know, like if you feel a certain draft, then you're near a certain window or something like that you might not realize consciously, but your subconscious mind could actually help you navigate that building in the dark because of all these little associations that you've built up over time. So it can be useful, and that's also the sort of thing that is involved in like hypnosis, or like if you're feeling familiar with Darren Brown, the guy that does those like sort of magician mentalist kind of videos. He basically uses like psychological techniques like biases and the way that System 1 works in order to reproduce the same sort of things that like mediums and psychics will do, but he does it like without any sort of supernatural explanation for it, just because he really like understands how those systems work.
What we wanted to talk about was the second half of the book, where they go into cognitive biases. This is like in no way a new topic in CRO or anything. Like, many people have written good articles about it. In overall, there are over like 150 biases, or even like 180 or something that are listed. And there's like many articles where companies have chosen like some of them to find examples on website and how people are using them in marketing. Like ad conversion chose 19, CXL chose 18. Some other companies have written about 72 of them. I'll link all of those resources down below as well. But for the purposes of this video, we chose 9 that we want to talk about. We decided that we don't want to go scouring the internet for examples on other people's site, because who has the time for that? So we're just like trying to come up with examples of how those biases that we chose to talk about today could be used on our site that we recently launched. And the examples that we're gonna talk about here are hypothetical. They're not like implemented on our site or anything, nor do we kind of recommend necessarily implementing these things. Like, we're gonna go into more detail in a second, but like some of them even verge on like dark patterns almost, and it's kind of like bad examples of what not to do on your site.
On the topic of like consumer psychology and cognitive biases in order to optimize a website, it's sort of like using psychology to manipulate people. So you have to be kind of careful with that and make sure that you're using this power for good and not for evil, like with anything. Another way of looking at it is like helping people do what they want to do easier. So like you can use these kind of ideas to just not get in people's way. Like, if you understand how people's brains work and how they're processing information, then you can make the process better for them. And you know, there's a certain amount of personal responsibility involved. So like, people should know about these things. Like, these things should be taught in schools so that people are aware of the little tricks and psychological tools that people use in order to influence their behavior. And that's also, you know, one of the reasons that we're going to talk about it. And some of the things we're going to mention, there's not really a legitimate use for it. Like, if you were going to try to use some of these biases, it would only be kind of, you know, in order to trick people. So we'll also call that out when that's the case.
I also decided to leave out some of the like more popular ones that get talked about constantly in digital marketing, like confirmation bias and anchoring.
Yeah, some of these have just been discussed to death already, and so we're not really adding anything by going over them yet again, but we'll provide you some resources if you want to get up to speed if you're not familiar with them.
Okay, so the first one we want to talk about is frequent exposure bias. And I think this one has like different names. I think it's also called mere exposure effect in some circles. And basically this just means that the more you see something, the more you're going to trust it or think that it's like a good thing or something like that.
This is kind of the idea behind, you know, big companies with big marketing budgets that are trying to break into, you know, a particular industry or field. They can basically just like spend money on getting their messaging in front of people over and over again. And then even if they're kind of like a relatively, you know, small contender compared to their competitors, people will just start to associate them in that same kind of consideration set. So.
Yeah, and I think it also just applies a lot in content marketing strategy these days. Any kind of content strategist or a marketer will tell you that you need to post constantly every day, every week. And that's like the only way to grow, because you have to create this, I don't know, perception in people's mind that you put out stuff regularly, and so people will expect it almost.
Just by you, like your brand, personal brand, business brand or whatever, just getting yourself in front of people often kind of ingrains it in their memory. And then there's also the layer of like repeating the same message over and over again will make people more likely to believe it. So that's like a concept that gets used in government propaganda all the time, and it's even just like in a single article, you know, professional copywriters and stuff will often repeat the same point a few times just to kind of like drive it home a bit and like use that effect a little bit.
And I guess you could also go into like evolutionary theory here, that, you know, your brain likes things that are familiar and
Yeah.
it feels like safer. What is the example from our website or our business?
Well, I don't think we've made use of that yet, but how we could, or maybe are in the process of, is publishing content regularly, fairly frequently.
Yeah, this is our second video.
Yeah, here we are again.
Yeah, and I think it could even apply to smaller things, like keeping your, I don't know, if you have like different social accounts or something, and keeping the kind of names and logos and kind of themes of your brand consistent throughout like different channels. So next one that we wanted to talk about is the bandwagon effect. What is a bandwagon? It's like a...
I assume it's like a wagon that has a band on it, but I've never really looked into or thought about that. I mean, like, we all know about jumping on the bandwagon.
But like, what is it like physically? Also, it's like a carriage or something, right?
Yeah, this looks like a parade float or something, like a wagon. There's just a band on that wagon.
Okay. What this means is people adopting the behavior that they see other people adopting. So if you see like a group of people acting a certain way, you are more likely to act that way as well. So you could find examples of that in the media or whatever. It's like lots of people doing something, I don't know, protesting. Other people want to protest too. Besides, it can apply to, I don't know, having like testimonials, for example. So like when you see that other people support this kind of a business or had a good experience with it, then you're probably more likely to think that it's good for you as well.
This is the idea behind a lot of social proof, basically, like especially the kind where it's like, you know, trusted by 15 million happy customers or something, like just saying like a really big number of like how many people have used this product, then that kind of makes you more likely to give it a try.
Or companies putting this social proof bar on their website and said, we worked with Facebook and Google.
Like people saying that they worked with giant companies that they probably just had some.
Yeah, it's like saying that you worked with Google, but then you only just worked with, and you have Google Analytics or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like
using Google Docs. Worked with Google.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think like that one kind of touches on credibility as well. Like the typical logo strip it's a little bit like, so it's a little bit of bandwagon effect in the sense of like, look at these companies or these well-known brands that we worked with and maybe you want to work with us too. But it also brings in, you know, credibility of like, these are, and recognition too. Like these are brands that you recognize, these people have used our services and therefore you should too.
Yeah, so this is, I think, one of those cases where it can go either way, right? Like you can misuse it and use it to trick people, or it can actually be valid and valuable if you use like real testimonials from your real clients or customers or whatever. Like there's nothing bad about that if, you know, you have their consent to publish that and like everything.
Yeah, I think a important consideration in like using these things ethically is honesty. So, you know, if you're going to say that however many people have used this service, like make sure that that's a true statement for one. And that's kind of a good first layer for that sort of thing.
Yeah, and there's even like services for companies with huge client bases that show it in real time, I guess, if somebody like signed up or bought something. And then you can see on the site, for example, it's like, oh, somebody just bought it.
I've never tested that one.
Yeah, is that even real? Or is that just some kind of made up thing?
No, I've seen it for sure. Like I've been on websites where it'll be like this person from Texas.
But
just
you think
purchased.
it's real data?
I think so, yeah, because there's plugins that actually do that.
But then like anyone who is included in that data has to consent, theoretically, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some considerations there. In terms of like using people's name and location and stuff. So I wonder if like GDPR has kind of put a damper on those types of things. The next one we're talking about is called sunk cost effect. And this is basically the idea that once somebody has invested something, even if that's not related to the future decision, it will still affect their decision. So maybe that's not the best explanation. I remember the way that it was explained to me in school was, say that you bought a movie ticket, you're planning to go to a movie with your friends, right? And then when you get to the theater, you realize that you've lost the ticket, right? So the temptation would be to say, oh, okay, well, I shouldn't go to the movie anymore because otherwise I'll have to like end up have paid double for this movie. But the thing is, at that point in time, it's a sunk cost. You already paid the money for that original ticket. You're not going to get it back, right? So the decision to make is now, do I want to pay the cost of this movie in order to see this movie? Do you want to pay the price for the benefit you're going to get? The fact that you had already paid it and lost it shouldn't factor into that next decision. Unless, of course, that was your last $16 in your bank account and you don't have any more. But
it's also known as irrational escalation or escalation of commitment.
Yeah, I think this one comes into play in gambling a lot too, where people will kind of like chase losses and stuff like that. They won't be thinking of like the decision they're making in isolation. They'll be considering how much they've like already spent, and like, you know, that money is gone. It's a sunk cost, so you can't get it back anyway. So
I think also it is related to loss aversion, like a bit, but
yeah, that makes sense. The way that you can make use of this effect mostly comes into play in like multi-step interactions. So say like you have a sign-up process that's like 4 steps long or something. If you arrange things so that the first couple of steps are easy or fun or something, answering just easy questions, rather than asking for personal information right away, people will, once they've kind of like answered a couple of questions and they're a couple steps into the process, then they're more likely to continue through because they've already invested that effort in the first couple of steps. So you'll like, just by rearranging the order of steps to kind of have progressive levels of commitment, you can make it so that people will be more likely to complete the whole process from start to finish.
This is also the form thing that you were talking about. It's a funny topic. Any client or company that I think we've worked with is usually people are super hesitant to create more steps in the form. But yeah, in reality, if you like break up a really field heavy form into more steps, then it can actually be beneficial.
Yeah, surprisingly. Or maybe not. Yeah.
We should test it. Next one is contrast effect. And this is actually the most self-explanatory one, I think. You can just compare stuff on your website, for example, with your competitors, if you find a legal way to do it, or even like compare products or services or whatever.
The effect itself, contrast effect, is kind of related to like mostly visual stuff, but it actually applies to other areas as well. But like with the visual thing, it's about how like if you first look at certain colors and then you quickly change it and look at two colors that are identical, then they actually look like they're different because of what you saw before. Or like just a super basic example is like if you have your hand in cold water and then you put it into like lukewarm water, it will feel hotter than if you had just put your hand in that water in the first place. So it's like just how the brain will kind of like compare what it's looking at now to what it has just experienced or what's kind of like next to it and stuff.
Wait, is this the same one as the cheerleader effect?
I don't know. What is the cheerleader effect?
No, that's more like the group attractiveness effect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there is a thing. Contrast effect does relate to attractiveness, though. Like,
a person will appear more or less attractive than that person does in isolation when immediately preceded by or simultaneously compared to, respectively, a less or more attractive person. I think I get it. If you stand next to another person who is more attractive or something,
then you'll look less attractive.
Yes.
Yeah. So
but that's also like, that's logic. Of course, like
it's pretty obvious.
It's like so obvious, yeah.
I think the takeaway here is that you should have ugly friends.
What would be an example in our site?
Well, like competitor comparisons, like you said, is a pretty common one. I think it also kind of relates to anchoring, which we kind of briefly mentioned, but like, you know, say you like tell a story about the way that something is, then present the way that you do it, it will look better if the story was kind of like more negative or something. So it's basically about creating contrast in different ways so that like the thing that you're presenting or describing is being compared to, you know, a less favorable example so that it looks better.
Next one is a decoy effect. This one is also kind of dicey, I think, and basically every SaaS company out there, I think, does this. It's when you create like different variations of your services or products. It means that you create one thing that you deliberately don't want people to buy, so it kind of like also contrasts the other ones that you definitely want people to buy, right?
Like McDonald's and stuff does this too, or like movie theater popcorn or something. Like they'll have like an absurdly big one that like no one would ever get, and then so it makes...
I get the big one.
Okay, not nobody. So it makes the other options kind of make more sense. And I think like there's I can't think of the specific example, but cases where it's like more expensive even considering how much bigger it is. Like it's say 10% bigger, but it's actually 15% more expensive. So like if people are kind of doing the cost benefit comparison, they'd be like, oh, that option doesn't make sense. I'm gonna go for the medium option that actually like does make sense.
Yeah, and you think that, yeah, I'm not giving the company what they want in terms of going for the most expensive option, but they've already like made that decision for you basically.
Yeah, and I think like in our case, we could present, like we don't have this yet where we have our different service offerings with the pricing, but if we did, we could create like a super ultra premium version of the service that has all sorts of bells and whistles that nobody really needs and is like absurdly expensive, and that would make the other options look a lot more reasonable.
But you don't think that that is dicey or unethical in some sense?
I don't know. I think it's kind of okay. Because there's nothing like deceptive about it. The person is still free to make their choice of which one they want. And so it's I guess a little bit sneaky.
Like reminds me of and that I think is actually a dark pattern when you add like a timer to something and like create the illusion that the thing is gonna be sold out. if you don't complete your checkout in like 10 minutes or whatever. And that is almost always like false. Like,
yeah, I don't think that that's related to decoy effect. I think that's a sort of sketchy use of like
I don't mean that
artificial
it's like
urgency.
related directly to the decoy thing, but it's just like kind of on the same level of sketchiness almost.
Yeah, like that one I would say creating an artificial sense of urgency.
Yeah. Like lots of companies actually that do these like different options don't even think like this. But like if you do it deliberately, that you know that nobody will buy this and it's just there for people to choose the other one that you want them to choose.
Yeah.
Then it's like kind of, I don't know, it kind of makes me feel like icky. Hot hand fallacy is up next. Explanation for this one is a person who has experienced success has a greater chance of further success in additional attempts. So like the most simple example is like when you're like flipping a coin, right? What we were talking about. And you get, I don't know, whichever side you want to get like 5 times in a row, you think that you're on like a winning streak or something like that, right? Or also just relates to gambling a lot and stuff like that.
The thing that works in the opposite direction where people, I think it's like the small number effect or the law of small numbers, something about that, where if something is random, and like coin flip is a good example for that. If people say, you know, you get a few heads in a row, then there is like a bias where people will expect that you're more likely to get tails the next time, right? So there's that. But when it comes to like people, so like they did like a study with this where they put the focus on the person flipping the coin. So they said they in one version of it, the person would say I got a heads or I got tails. And they compared that to like people saying the coin is flipped heads or the coin is running like 2 tails in a row or something. So by shifting the focus to the person, then that invokes the one that we're talking about, the hot hand effect, where somebody starts thinking like, okay, this person's on a streak now, you know, it's gonna keep going, they're gonna keep winning. And most of the, like if you read the Wikipedia about this one, it's mostly about basketball, which is like where it first came. And the original idea was that like people would think that if someone is like made a couple of good shots in a row, that they're going to keep the streak going. But the more they studied it, the more they found that that actually was true. So there's probably a lot that factors into that. And it might even be like sort of bias related on some level, like the player, because they made a couple more shots, they're more confident in their abilities, and so they're more likely to make the next shot. And same with like their teammates. The teammates see the player like, you know, hitting a couple baskets, so they're more likely to do things to set that person up for success and stuff. Well, it's the original thing. They kind of realized like it isn't really a bias or a fallacy with basketball. So
yeah, I guess people with skills just do better anyway, right?
Yeah. So it's like this one kind of factors in between when it's like a really skilled thing where the skills actually determine the outcome, and a completely random thing where people will expect if it, you know, get a couple of heads in a row that now you're going to get tails. So it's kind of this weird in between area.
Yeah, and this one was actually kind of hard to find an example on a website. But then we started thinking about like just our business and CRO, and we thought that maybe an example could be like if you get like a streak of winning tests in a row, then you get overly confident or something. Yeah,
and like if you wanted to try to use this to your advantage, you could highlight that fact. Like we have 5 winning tests in a row.
We ran 150 winning tests for this company, but this is like testing is also such a like a weird wide topic where there's so many variables that go into it, and you know, how good are you at running them, analyzing them, whatever.
Yeah, and also, you know, the reason that it wouldn't be a good idea to do that is that you shouldn't be so focused on just winning tests. This is like a much larger topic, obviously.
Also, your A/B testing tool might be broken if you have 150 winning tests in a row.
Yeah,
just check your setup, man.
Yeah, maybe run an AA test
and
see how that goes.
Next one is insensitivity to sample size. Might be the most applicable, important one in CRO, because sample size is something that we have to work with a lot. And people judge the probability of obtaining a sample statistic without respect to the sample size. So in CRO, what it means is that you have 20 conversions versus 15, and you think you have a winning test, which you do not.
Well, you just don't know yet.
No, I mean when it is stopped, and that, or you stop it and think.
Oh. Yeah, I've seen worse examples too, where it's like 3 conversions versus 1 conversion, and someone's saying they have a 300% increase or 200% increase or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it's also like the most ridiculous example in the world is all those like surveys and like information that get presented to you in the media, and that says that 50% of the population like thinks this, and then you start digging and nobody like discloses of how many people they surveyed or anything like that, and then later you find out that they asked like 100 people behind a Walmart parking lot or something. And it's like would be the same if like we wrote a blog article and said that 50% of conversion rate optimizers are Canadian based on our independent research, but we actually surveyed just us.
Yeah.
2 people.
We don't really think there is a way to like use this in an ethical way, although I think in the CRO world it gets used a lot when talking about case studies for experiments that were just based on really low samples, like we were saying. More something to be aware of, and then something that just like we have to deal with almost daily, like when we're trying to educate our clients about how to run tests and stuff, and explain that, you know, even if you get statistical significance on really low numbers, like it's still not representative. So I guess that's like another level to it, because probably the effect is more related to not even having statistical significance. But there's a lot of cases where if you have a big enough effect, you can have a significant result, but it's still not likely to have any kind of relevance to the actual population.
Yeah, and I think it's just so easy to get caught up in actually something you should think about before launching the test, right? Like it should be calculated beforehand, but there's usually so much stuff to do to get the test out of the door that you just like kind of want to get it live, because it needs time to collect the data as well, right? Especially if you have low sample size. But then later on you're like, oh crap, I should have thought about this like before.
Another topic that we could talk for hours about.
Bandwidth calculation. Second to last one that we're going to talk about is rhyme as reason effect. I think this is my favorite one. So I like things that rhyme. And basically, it's also simple. When you see something that rhymes or has like a jingle, even like in a commercial or something, then you're more likely to remember that and obtain that information. It's like that's why all those like commercials write these like little, I don't know, songs that rhyme and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that's why so many things in songs like seem so deep, because they rhyme.
Yeah, you will think it's more accurate and truthful when it is written in rhyme. And I thought of an amazing example for our website actually. We could say on our services page that if you're in the mood for a website that is good, fill out this form and we'll make it perform. Ryan doesn't think that mood and good rhymes, but I am very happy with it.
Mood and good. Maybe it's like if you're in the hood for a website that's good.
Oh, okay, yeah. Maybe that's even better. Let us know if that would make you buy our services more.
I don't know. We don't have the sample size to test it anyway.
Yeah. I wish that we will get to that point in our website's life where we have so much traffic that we can start testing these rhyming value props.
Rhyming taglines.
Yes.
Yeah, we probably only need millions of visitors every month to be able to do that.
That's totally doable. We'll get there. And the last one is called present bias. And no, we don't mean gift. It's the tendency of people to give stronger weight to payoffs that are closer to the present time when considering trade-offs between two future moments. The most basic example that you've probably heard of is the marshmallow experiment done in Stanford University that every psychology and self-help book just starts with. It's where kids were offered a marshmallow and said that if you don't eat it right now or wait like 15 minutes or something, you will get even more marshmallows, but like most of them just ate the marshmallow right away. Mm-hmm. So they chose the smaller benefit over the greater one.
You know, it's not like one marshmallow now or like 1.2 marshmallows later. It's like even if you get twice as many later, like people still want the instant gratification instead of disciplining themselves to delay it.
Yeah, and in terms of like CRO and websites, I think you ran a pretty interesting test for a client for that, right?
Yeah, this was it was a client that had a welcome pop-up in order to get email subscribers, and the lead magnet was a contest where you can win a product, and they do like a draw every week, so you could win like the whole thing. And so, you know, we did a lot of tests on this, but basically the one that relates to this is it came from a learning from a previous test where we found if we made the test more prominent, or made the contest more prominent, that people would actually sign up for it more, but then they would actually end up purchasing less. So that's obviously not the effect that we were going for. And so the hypothesis was that because we were bringing more attention to the fact that they might win this thing later, then they were less likely to buy it now. So the follow-up experiment was, instead of a contest where they have a chance of winning something in the future that's worth, like it was worth around $100 if they win, we would give them just a small discount right now, which was I think $5. And that actually ended up winning over the contest version. So, you know, small benefit now versus much larger potential future benefit, which also introduces the idea of like it not being a certainty. So it probably would have been a different story. Well, it definitely would be a different story if we would say, we will for sure give you this thing in a week, versus having some small chance of winning it. But still, you know, small benefit now outweighed a much larger potential future benefit.
Yeah. And I was thinking in terms of like what could be a good example that we could actually do on our own website as well. And we've been talking about, you know, different kind of services or stuff we could offer. And then we've been toying with the idea of like just selling like this one-off service of like a heuristic review or some kind of package that you get a website analysis right away. Like you pay right away and you get it in a couple of days in a neatly packaged form. In contrast of selling like a retainer service or something that goes on over a long period of time or something. And that would be almost like I think an interesting experiment for us to do longer term as well, to see which one of those would attract more interest.
Yeah, I think it might be more fair to compare it to like a one-off project that just has more of a delay, like a big research project where you're not going to get the results for like a month and a half or something like that, versus something that's like more immediate.
But I mean, even with testing, it's like, you know, if somebody wants testing, like to get to that point, it usually takes quite a bit of time because you need to do some research, onboarding, and then, you know, gather the data for the tests as well and stuff. So actually, from the moment of like starting the consultation service from a client's perspective, I mean, and getting to a point where you have a test analysis report is like a long period of time.
Yeah, true. So that might be an argument in favor of like structuring a testing retainer so that we get started with some tests right away, rather than waiting to go through the full kind of research process before testing even starts.
Yeah, but then there's still like argument for, tests that have more research behind them and like are more thought out in terms of hypos and stuff will have better chances of winning and so on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's better, but if the client is interested in tests and they will value getting to the testing part quicker, then you need to balance those factors.
That was it. That was our list of biases that we wanted to talk about. As Ryan said, we're not psychologists. Don't try some of these out.
Yeah.
Use them for good.
Use them for good, or don't use them at all.
It's even more important to observe your own behavior in the wild of like, do you fall victim to these tactics and, educate other people as well.
Also, I wanted to mention that sort of how these relate to the System 1 and System 2 thing is that the cognitive biases are more likely to affect the System 1, like, quick decision part of your brain. So, like, the more you have time to actually think through something and use your rational mind, the less likely you are to be susceptible to them. And, I think being aware of them definitely helps with that. Although I'm pretty sure I've seen a study where, like, knowing about cognitive biases actually doesn't make you any more likely to be able to avoid them. But it seems to me that it should, so I think it's still a good idea. And, like, so, whether or not you can use these things on a website, for example, it depends a lot on the context, I think. Like, if it's like a small product that's more appropriate for like impulse purchases, then these little like cognitive biases I think can be more powerful. But if it's something that has like a long consideration period, then you're more likely to get the slow part of your brain that actually thinks things through involved, and so these probably wouldn't have as much of an effect. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I've definitely been a victim of a couple of these in the past, but I like to think that those were before my career as a website person. And now I'm smarter and I see through all of it. But probably it still happens, yeah. And I wonder if somebody gave me a marshmallow, if I would eat it. But if it was a marshmallow, then I would totally think of the experiment because I've read about it so many times.
We do have some marshmallows, actually.
Yeah, but I know I can have the entire pack right away if I want.
What if I hide them?
That was the video. Thanks for watching.
Let us know what you think.
Bye. It's like any kind of content strategist. Oh my god, did you see that?
Wow, that's a big bee. Is that a murder hornet?
No, I think it's a wasp.
Oh.
Oh my god, do they live in our house?
No, you can't get in.
Oh my god.
It's okay.
They're just like not interested in being in the video.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm trying to get more views.